giving you a bit of a teaser on what will be coming up for the next 2 days at Drone Enable. And then we are going to move straight into the wrap-up session and events coming up for the rest of this year and next year. So, to get started, Drone Enable, ICAO's Unmanned Aircraft Systems Industry Symposium. So we've been hearing a whole lot over the last 3 days about RPAS and the high end of the UAS family. This will take us into the smaller end of the family. And this all started for us about 2.5 years ago at the High Level Safety Conference, where IATA in particular, but reinforced by multiple states, raising the concern about small drones operating illegally and dangerously near international aerodromes, where international flights are coming in and out. So that made this a concern for us here at ICAO as well, because it is affecting international aviation. It's a hazard in a local environment affecting international aviation. So at our assembly last year, we were further requested to get involved. We were actually asked to develop a baseline of provisions for UAS that operate outside of the IFR international framework. So the fact that we were already engaged with the high-end RPAS, what the states were saying is, please come help us with all the rest of this, whether it is part of ICAO's regular mandate or not. We want ICAO to be involved with this. So just a quick recap, the difference between RPA and drone, as we are distinguishing the two here. The RPA, remotely piloted aircraft, is a full-fledged member of the aviation system, operating with ATC, interacting with other pilots, etc. Drones, for the most part, are the exact opposite. We need to keep them away from manned aviation. They are not interacting directly with manned aircraft. So we need something totally different. But again, just looking, they come in all shapes and sizes, and this is really a domestic issue, but it's a domestic issue that we have 191 member states of ICAO that have stood up to say, get involved with this domestic issue for us, please. And I love this image. I like showing it to people. This was from a couple years ago. Drone Industry Insight put this together just to try and highlight the number of entities involved, in particular at the low end, but to an extent at the higher end of RPAS. And this was not even a complete listing 2 years ago. The number of companies, universities, research institutes, et cetera, that are involved with unmanned aviation is tremendous and grows just about daily. So coming at this from the ICAO perspective, we look and say, okay, fine, you want us to be involved. The general public is looking at the tremendous economic potential of unmanned aviation, particularly with the small drones. So are politicians. There's huge political pressure to leverage all this economic potential. But from our perspective at ICAO, looking at aviation safety and security, we've got a lot of concerns about that, and they all need to be balanced. We cannot place any one entirely above the other. So I showed you this slide a couple days ago, and we've been spending all our time so far talking about the RPAS activity. Well, Drone Enable for the next 2 days does that other bucket, the other UAS, looking at the UAS Toolkit, but primarily looking at UAS traffic management, UTM. And with that, things like registration, network deliveries, and such. Now, as we look at the non-RPAS UAS, What's very important to understand is that all of the principles of aviation still apply. Airworthiness is just as important. So are the rules of the air, and having educated operators and pilots, or in our case, remote pilots. Safety management is fundamental to everything, and we've heard that over and over again for the last 3 days. But all of this has to be scaled appropriately based upon the size of the aircraft, the type of operation, where the operation will occur, and what types of, well, in this case, instead of having a certificate of airworthiness, who knows, we may be looking at consumer product certifications, at least for some of the drones. These are things to be determined. Where do we draw a line, or do we actually end up with some type of gray area between where one set of rules, the traditional aviation rules, apply, versus a scaled down version? What we definitely don't want to see is a disregard of these traditional principles. So separation standards. Instead of talking nautical miles between aircraft, or 1,000 feet or 2,000 feet from buildings, other obstructions, people, we're talking about potentially 1 or 2 meters. The scale is entirely different. Aviation safety of life spectrum. That's not what we anticipate being used for drones. We don't have enough of it for manned or the high end of aviation, so we're certainly not going to be sharing it at the low end. So what kinds of communication systems are going to be employed? There are a lot of options out there. We heard a lot this week about licensing and operational limitations. So again, these are different ways of approaching some of these problems, trying to scale appropriately. And it all comes down to the safety management, the risk to third parties of an 80,000 kilogram aircraft versus a 2 kilogram aircraft. The rules should not be exactly the same. So for the other UAS, in response to the initial request from the High-Level Safety Conference, we developed a toolkit. That toolkit, which you have access to directly from the symposium map, has a lot of general guidance for national regulators. It also has links to any states that have so far provided us the links to their websites. And we encourage if you go looking to see if your state is there and it's not, we encourage you to forward us the information. We will get it connected. It also has a lot of practical examples for people. So we think this toolkit is already very useful, but it's one small step along the way to where we need to get. So tomorrow we start with the expansion. We put out the request for information to states as well as to industry and academia. We asked for solutions that can be recommended for global applicability on the framework for UTM. What are those outer constructs within which UTM should be not necessarily contained, but where does the harmonization fit? What are the outer boundaries related to the harmonized parts? We're also talking about registration, and we've been hearing that over the last couple days, that registration is a critical piece in all of this. And part of why we need registration is for the identification and tracking of UAS or drones. The communication systems. We'll be hearing a lot of proposals on what the communication systems can or should look like. And finally, those geofencing-like systems to keep drones out of areas they should not be while allowing them to operate anywhere else. So, on behalf of ICAO, I would like to invite all of you to be a part of this new activity. Join us here for the next 2 days. Participate, contribute into this new discussion, and we are looking for this to very much be a discussion. We will have a lot of proposals being brought forward. They need to be debated. We will have our UAS advisory group present to take notes, see how things are developing, what the responses are, and they will be drafting guidance material based upon those outcomes. So please come and be a part of this. Thank you. Now we're going to have the wrap up and next steps, which is a lot about the upcoming activities, from Mr. Stephen Kramer. Steve is the director of the Air Navigation Bureau, so all of this work is being done under his direction. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be able to come back and join you, unfortunately, at the end. But I think it's important that I be able to reflect back to you what I've heard from the proceedings that have been relayed to me through the course of the symposium while I've been off-site, and then again this afternoon. So I'm going to review for you what we've heard has been key themes during the symposium this week, and then talk a little bit about some of the next steps after the symposium. So on day one, we heard that all the keynote speakers and then the first sessions were overwhelmingly recognized the need for an international regulatory framework for safe, efficient operations. I think that's a continuation of a theme we've had for some time, but it is becoming more and more clear for the community and for the industry. And now I think especially for the regulatory community, as we've tried to coalesce in various ways through the work in the RPAS panel, and then working with JARIS and some of the other organizations around the world. So there's clearly a need for a global framework, international, that allows everyone to play on an equivalent level playing field. This is complicated by the operating environment between states. Some don't have regulations. In non-segregated airspace and shared airdromes, there is concern about raising safety concern, evaluating the safety effectively and then putting proper procedures and mitigations in place. And many speakers stated that an effective categorization of UAS is required to address the regulatory challenges as you do try to craft and write regulations. Collaboration between the states, regional organizations, both manned and unmanned industry, will be crucial to ensuring safety and that risks are addressed well. It is all the more important that we continue to share in our commitment to safety and in the spirit of collaboration and transparency. So we float on to day two, and I understand in day two you got down to the nuts and bolts, and there was a lot of discussion about competency-based training, the differences and the benefits as compared to the traditional approach to training, and how the community will have to make adjustments to be able to do this effectively. Equally important, states are preparing their inspectors for the challenge of overseeing performance-based training schemes, which for some will be new. And licensing authorities are learning and adapting to this new approach. And we heard that they need some time. Now, it appears this morning was actually a very full agenda, and you had several topics that are of interest to me, but I know you heard it, so you addressed the way forward from a broader perspective, starting with the changes required for air traffic controllers' perspective on RPAS and ATM on the different playing fields, particularly the controller-pilot relationship and how that will translate to this environment. Contingency plans and procedures for lost control and command links, human factors, training, and many more issues. We heard a strong position by some players on certain topics that is not acceptable to change the rules and regulations for manned aviation in order to accommodate UAS integration. And I think that we can appreciate that, and we'll be careful to reflect that in deliberations within the panel, although honestly I don't think that's up to ICAO to make that call. It's going to be a continuing dialogue between the two industries about how that goes forward, but we've heard the message. And there were many questions about automation, autonomy of flight, self-separation. No mature solutions yet. And I'm not surprised by that because that's the hard work. Automation drives advances, it has driven advances in manned aviation, and it will be a key driver in the evolution of unmanned aviation, and frankly, probably more so even. So we're hopeful that we'll see some lessons come out of this R&D and this demonstration activity in unmanned aviation that'll be applicable on the other field. But then how to regulate it, how to create procedures for pilots and controllers to know their role in a semi-automatic environment is a big challenge, particularly one where they might transition in and out of that environment. On the broad scope of the aviation system as a whole, there was consensus for pragmatic, performance-based regulations that will evolve in an incremental manner as technology develops. And that fits with the theme we have at ICAO, where we're trying to be performance-based, but in close collaboration with technical specification organizations who do the work in the industry itself. There were issues on security, including information data management, that are emerging, that are linked with these technologies, and this will be considered as part of the broader cybersecurity and cyber safety program that ICAO is working with the states to kick off now. But RPAS is clearly one of the key areas where we'll have to be having dialogue between the industry and that overall policy discussion. And finally, there was a significant interaction between the UAS traffic management and the traditional air traffic management fields and techniques. Discuss the new business models and the way of working with new service providers. And you'll hear more about that, I think, over the next couple of days during Drone Enable. So I hope that you'll be able to engage in that conversation. Now I'm going to go off script a little. Over the last 6 months, I've personally been involved in a series of seminars and activities, not only related to aviation, but related to artificial intelligence, related to activities in the fourth industrial revolution. And the thing that I think is not clear to most regulators or most traditional aviation people is how much computing horsepower is available now to be brought to the problems that we have been working on for a whole generation, 2 generations. The automation of traditional manned air traffic control, air traffic management is probably going to take a leap as a result of the activities in UTM. And so I think this industry needs to be very thoughtful about how that can happen. So I go back to my prior comment that I hear that manned aviation doesn't want any change. And that's like saying, I want a rotary dial telephone, regardless of whether you want to give me a smartphone. 2 examples that I want to give. I'm watching commercial space operations, and boosters are coming back to the ground and firing at an exact altitude so that they can land after going to space. And the computing to make that possible is something that didn't exist 5 years ago. And in artificial intelligence, there's a computer that beat the human Go player for the first time a year ago. And I heard someone say recently that that same computer a year later can play 50 human Go players simultaneously, and they have no chance, any of them, of beating the computer because the computer is evolving that quickly. Now that's a very isolated, specific situation with a set of rules. But that kind of machine learning capacity can be applied to what we do in this industry, both for evaluating risk in the operation, evaluating the airspace, and more importantly, for evaluating the future of what might pose risk in the system. All of our data collection systems that come from safety management will provide the beginning of that evolution, and that can be applied to the trials that are being done in UAS and RPAS. So I hope you'll think about how all of this external activity that's happening outside of the aviation arena can be brought to the aviation community and help us to bring it here through the activities that you're part of. So there's a lot of work to do, and it doesn't stop with one symposium or two symposiums. And we're going to be talking about how a lot of the convergence between the safety evolution and the evolution of the air navigation plan and all of the new entrants and new technologies that can be applied in that arena at the Global Air Navigation Industry Symposium and the Safety and Air Navigation Implementation Symposium. Back-to-back symposiums, 5 days, 250 speakers and presentations. 3 streams running simultaneously, sometimes 4, over the course of the 5 days from December 11th to December 15th. And that's really a checkpoint on the ICAO process for developing new proposals that can come forward to the states a little over a year from now at the 13th Air Navigation Conference, should the system and the Air Navigation Commission set that agenda in that direction. But we're posing the opportunity so that the industry can talk to ICAO and tell it what it believes global regulatory evolution should look like to accommodate its needs. So GANIS-SANIS is really important for us, and I hope you'll join us. We'll talk about UAS traffic management. We will talk about what we heard at Drone Enable and how we've synthesized that since. We'll talk about the activities for upper, really high altitude airspace, above flight level 600, 650, and what we're doing to try and accommodate commercial space, which has some of the same needs and activity characteristics that RPAS has. A year from now, we're pleased to say that we will be conducting the 3rd ICAO RPAS Symposium. And in conjunction with partners in China, this will be held in Chengdu. September 10th to 12th is the date that we've penciled out. The program, of course, it's way early to tell you what's going to be in the program, but that will be held back-to-back with a Drone Enable at the same location. And we will expect to put out the request for information that will build that program in the same format that we're using for Drone Enable this time, about the end of January. That allows us to take everything that's coming through the fall, the things we've heard at Drone Enable, the things that we will discuss in the GANIS and the SANIS, and then from some internal dialogue that we're going to have with the Air Navigation Commission in early January, so that we can prepare the next set of questions to pose back out to the industry. So, see if I have any more slides. That's it. I really want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for your participation. That should not be for me, honestly. That should be for everybody that presented here this week. I'd like to congratulate all of the speakers and thank them for their engagement with us and with ICAO. And I would also like to thank the team that organized this. My staff that works in the remote piloted aircraft system arena, Leslie and her team, and then also the folks in the small UAS study group who have worked with us on how the sequencing was going to work between the RPAS and the Drone Enable, and you'll see some of that as we go through the program in the next couple of days. But thank you all for your participation. Leslie, do you have anything else that we need to close with?
Just a couple things.
Okay, so before you do that, thanks to everybody here.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Steve. That was great. And actually, he stole some of my thunder because I wanted to be able to say once again to all the panelists, the speakers, the moderators, we really appreciate you stepping up, coming and joining us, presenting information, helping us with all of this information exchange. So thank you, all of you, as well as the audience. In particular, the RPAS panel participants. So once again, if I could get the RPAS panel participants to stand up, because none of this work would be happening without these people putting in unbelievable amounts of hours and days, not just with the RPAS panel, but with JARIS and EuroK, RTCA, and various other entities. So they have more than full-time jobs, and yet they're still doing this work with us. So thanks to all of them. And because this was one of our first events, at least in the first RPAS event, where we had technology supporting us. So we have the RPAS app that you've been making use of for the last 3 days, and you will have a new app for the next 2 days. So all of you that are coming back tomorrow morning, the UAS 2017 app will have your program and all the other information about speakers, et cetera. Get that downloaded this afternoon and you'll be ready to go first thing tomorrow morning. And finally, again, yes, the RPAS team who put in incredible hours on this. They're all up front here, as well as Leah. Thanks to all of you guys for all the work you put in. All right. And with that, you are released. No be-back time other than if you are coming for Drone Enable tomorrow, which I hope most, if not all of you are, 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, same place. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.